In this class, we're studying what's called the p-value approach to hypothesis testing. In the p-value approach, our first step is to state the null and alternative hypothesis. Our second step is to decide on a level of significance of our test. We call that alpha. Step 3 is to compute the value of the test statistic, whether we're talking about a z-score or a t-score. And step 4 is determining the p-value, which is a probability value, p. Our fifth step is that we're going to compare our p-value with alpha, and we're going to reject the null hypothesis if that p-value is less than alpha. Otherwise, we do not reject the null hypothesis, and we interpret the result of the hypothesis test. So what possible conclusions can we reach? Based on the test that we're using, we're looking for a type 1 error. In this case, consider yourself like a jury. We're not deciding whether or not the null hypothesis is true. We're looking to see if there's enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. If there is, then we reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there was not sufficient evidence to support its alternative. But if the whole null hypothesis is not rejected, then we conclude that there was not sufficient evidence to support the alternative hypothesis. In either case do we say that the null hypothesis is true. We simply either have enough evidence to reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis. So let's look at some information that I found on a particular test. In this test, we see that we have we've stated our null hypothesis that the mean is 68.5 inches. Perhaps we're talking about heights. Its alternative is that the mean is not equal to 68.5 inches. We're conducting a two-tailed test. Our sample size was 125 people, and our X bar, our sample mean, was 38.5 inches. But we happen to know that the population standard deviation is 3.2 inches. So if we conduct a two-tailed test, we're going to conduct it with alpha equals 0.05. That means that we're looking for a p-value that will be less than that if we conclude that our hypothesis test is incorrect. That's what we're going to reject. After conducting our test, we find a critical score of -2.54. The p-value that we found is 0.0052. So what conclusion should we reach? Well, in this case, the p-value 0.0052 is much less than 0.005. Based on that conclusion that the p-value is definitely less than alpha, that we're going to say that our null hypothesis, we have enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. And so that would be our statement, reject the null hypothesis. If that p-value was either equal to or greater than our alpha, then we would fail to reject the null hypothesis.